My daughter lifted her champagne flute in front of 200 guests and declared that she despised my last name. The entire ballroom erupted in laughter, while I just sat there, quietly marking every syllable of her disrespect. The most awful part wasn't the public humiliation. It was finding out, that evening, just how much they all reveled in watching it happen. As they clapped for her little joke, I made a vow that I would never again be the woman they all assumed they could treat like a doormat. My name is Margaret Shaw. I'm 68 years old, and up until that Saturday, June 22, 2024, I truly believed I knew the value of the name I've always carried with dignity. It was a name that came attached to scarcity, but it was mine. I've been an antique restorer since I was 19, a woman who understands the world through the careful grain of old wood, who trusts the integrity of a joint and the strength of a character that refuses to warp, even when life tries to break it. Perhaps that's the reason why, when my daughter, Amanda Shaw, held up her glass in the Grand Hotel's ballroom and said with a grin that others mistook for charm, "I have always despised having this last name," I didn't fall apart. I didn't even flinch when her remark was greeted by a wave of laughter that bounced off those crystal chandeliers like a spray of gravel. Because rather than responding with fury, I did what I've always done. I drew a long breath, counted slowly to 10, and allowed my mind to catalog every single detail, so that I could analyze exactly how to respond when the time was right. The wedding itself had been at 5 o'clock at St. Lawrence Church, all bright and proper. I had been gripping a folded memorial card in my hand, one bearing the name of David Scott, my husband, Amanda's father, who we lost in March of 2023. I've carried it in my purse ever since the funeral, like a protective charm. I thought of him right then, as the master of ceremonies passed the microphone to my daughter. David would have grinned, with those lovely dark eyes that crinkled up when he laughed. He would have placed his hand on my arm if he sensed the disaster that was about to unfold. He would have recognized that little shadow of anxiety at the corner of Amanda's mouth, that telltale sign she inherited from me, the one that gives her away just before she says something she can't possibly defend later. I thought about how we raised her, between my long hours in the workshop and his double shifts, scribbling in homework notebooks in our tiny apartment in the old part of town, back when every penny was whispered about, and the old refrigerator hummed so loudly at night because its motor was giving out. I found myself wondering at what point her compass had gone so wrong. In which polished hallway of her big consulting firm did she start to think the Shaw name was something to be ashamed of? Amanda spoke about love, about how lucky she was to find Leo Sullivan, and about the patience he'd shown with her demanding work schedule. And then, with the room softened by all that easy sentiment, she delivered the line like a poisoned dart wrapped in a bow. "I have always hated having this last name. It embarrassed me in college, and it feels like a dead weight every time I have to sign it. Today, by getting married, I feel like I'm finally free of it." It was right after that when I heard the loud laughter from a table near the back. Her colleagues from New York, obvious in their expensive, flashy dresses. I saw Leo's fingers clench his champagne glass. He didn't laugh, but he didn't stop her either. Some of David's family members turned to look at that table, their faces confused. One of my aunts put her hand over her heart, and another cousin started frantically digging into the crème brûlée that had been served far too early, as if the dessert could somehow absorb the sour taste in the air. I didn't stand up. I didn't cause a fuss. I simply placed my fingertips on the linen tablecloth. I straightened my dessert fork against the napkin and mentally registered the silence coming from the people who knew exactly who had paid for every single one of Amanda's textbooks, every bus pass to get to school, and every new pair of shoes when she hit another growth spurt. My work restoring antiques has taught me that acting on impulse is a terrible idea, and that delicate veneers not treated with patience will eventually crack and peel away. In the middle of all the noise, I focused on the little things. The photographer was aiming his lens more at the table of New York friends than at the family. Leo's grandmother quietly shushed a grandchild who asked, "Why did she say that?" My old workshop neighbor, Larry Parrish, gently squeezed my shoulder as he walked by. It was a silent touch that clearly said, "I'm on your side," without needing a single word. And I thought back to March, to the papers I signed when I finally paid off the last bit of the loan on my workshop on Ferry Street, and the ledger where I write down all my commissions. There, on a page from April, was an entry, "Amanda called." Said her firm is asking where her last name comes from. I changed the subject. I knew there was a hairline crack, but I had never prepared myself for the whole thing to crumble. When the toast was over, a nephew came over with a strained smile. Don't take it so hard, Aunt Margaret. You know how kids joke these days. I replied with something my own father used to say whenever humor was used as a weapon: jokes that are designed to hurt are just truths spoken by cowards. I looked for Amanda, but she was surrounded by her friends, acting as if I were just another guest whose name she couldn't recall. At 10:30, I stepped out onto the terrace for some air. Chicago smelled like the first blooms of late spring. I switched on my phone and looked at my messages. 2 clients asking about the status of their chairs. My sister-in-law sending a heart emoji in response to the wedding photo. A notification from my bank. I put the phone back in my purse and took out David's memorial card. I spoke to him softly. You heard her, didn't you, dear? Our name is a burden to her. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was finding a new sense of purpose, to protect what we were. I went back into the ballroom just as they were announcing the cake. Someone urged me to make a small speech. I kept it brief. Congratulations, children. I hope life teaches you both to honor who you truly are. You could feel an awkward ripple go through the room. I accepted a very small slice of cake, tasting the sweetness as if I were memorizing one last detail, and I sat down right next to the empty chair that David should have been sitting in. At midnight, I walked home by myself down Trajan Street, holding a small box of wedding favors, a little card with their names misspelled, an embroidered napkin, and a photo of the new couple. The quiet city let me hear my own footsteps on the pavement, and the sound of my thoughts organizing themselves. They weren't thoughts of revenge, but of preservation. It was a lesson I'd learned from my work. If you sand a piece of delicate wood too aggressively, it splinters. But if you pass over it slowly, with patience, you bring its true color back to life. When I got home, I opened my old green ledger and wrote down the date. I left 3 lines empty, because some wounds need space to breathe. And then I wrote, pay attention to every action from this day forward. Do not offer explanations. Do not make excuses. Just wait. I used David's memorial card as a bookmark and went down to my workshop, because the scent of wood and varnish always brings me back to center. On my workbench was an order for the local school, a set of library bookshelves. I ran my hand along the smooth edge of the oak and thought that this was the only legacy I truly understood. Things that are useful, solid, and built with patience. The radio was playing a late-night talk show. A caller was talking about how our last names tell stories we often don't even know. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. As I sharpened a chisel, I mentally replayed scenes from the past with Amanda. The day I bought her that expensive suit for her first big interview. The night she gently asked me not to attend a dinner with her new executive friends. The time she corrected the way I said hors d'oeuvres in front of her roommates. I also remembered how generous she used to be as a child, always sharing her lunch at school. Nothing ever vanishes completely from a person, it just gets moved around. At 1:15 a.m., I locked up the workshop. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and opened an old tin box where I keep important papers. Among the photographs, there was a letter from my own father, dated 1979. Margaret, the kind of pride that weighs you down is the kind that makes you look down on other people. The pride that keeps your spine straight, well, that one doesn't weigh a thing. Life, just like wood, my dear, gives you back exactly the treatment you give it. The next few days went by in that strange, heavy calm that always comes before a big summer thunderstorm. Amanda didn't call on Sunday, just as I expected, nor on Monday. Her silence just confirmed what I already knew. She considered the whole wedding incident finished, just a bad joke that time would smooth over without her needing to explain or apologize. I recognized this tactic of hers from her teenage years. When she broke something or missed curfew, she would just wait quietly for the rhythm of family life to swallow the incident until it was like it never happened. For years, that strategy worked, mostly because David would step in with that wonderful fatherly diplomacy that could soften the sharp edges between a mother and a daughter. Now, without his presence to act as a bridge, the gap between us felt vast. On Tuesday, as I was applying a fresh coat of varnish to a round table for an elderly couple in the old district, I heard my neighbor, Thomas Warner, a retired mailman, call out from the doorway. "Margaret, have you seen the wedding updates on Instagram?" I set my brush down and turned around. Thomas was holding his phone out with a pained expression, showing me a picture of Amanda and Leo raising their glasses. One of the comments, left by someone named Michael Harris, read, "Finally free of that dusty antique shop name. Now you sound important." I wiped my hands on my canvas apron and handed the phone back to him. "Thank you for showing me, Thomas. It's good to know these things." He just nodded, with the serious look of a man who understands that some types of pain don't need to be spoken about. That evening, I opened my own social media account for the first time in ages, practically untouched since David passed away. The last photo I'd posted was from February, showing him smiling in our kitchen, making his famous Sunday lentils, wearing his favorite blue apron. The messages of condolence were still there. With the cold curiosity of someone reviewing a technical manual, I navigated to Amanda's profile. Her biography had been altered. Where it once said, Amanda Shaw, financial consultant, it now read, Amanda S. Scott, senior analyst. The change was subtle, but the intent was clear. She had demoted my last name to a mere initial and promoted her father's. I looked at her honeymoon pictures from Santorini. In every tag, she was Amanda Scott, with no trace of the name she found so heavy to carry. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was something much more complicated. It was the sorrow of a craftsman watching someone carelessly discard a piece of work they had spent decades restoring. Because raising a child is exactly that, a meticulous work of precision, where every single gesture helps shape the final piece. I remembered those winter afternoons when Amanda, maybe 8 or 9 years old, would sit on a stool in my workshop and ask me why wood had so many different patterns. "Every tree grows based on the storms it has to endure," I used to explain. "The marks you see aren't flaws. They're the story of how it managed to survive." Now, 25 years later, she was embarrassed by the very grains that had formed her. On Wednesday, I got a call I wasn't expecting. It was Leo, her new husband, his voice strained. "Margaret, I really need to talk to you. It's important." We met that afternoon at a small, quiet cafe downtown. He looked exhausted, dressed more casually than he had been at the wedding. He apologized for not contacting me since the reception, explaining that Amanda had wanted to cut off communication with Chicago while they adjusted to their life in New York. What he told me next confirmed my deepest fears about the turn my daughter's character had taken. Amanda had escalated her obsession with hiding her background, going so far as to invent entirely false stories about her past when meeting important clients. She tells them her mother was a retired art curator, that she grew up in a wealthy Chicago suburb, Leo confessed, looking completely miserable. "I've asked her to stop lying, but she calls them narrative adjustments that are necessary for her networking." The coldness of that phrase made my blood run cold. My daughter had turned the denial of my life's work into a marketing plan. "But there's something worse," Leo continued. "Last week, we attended a dinner with some senior partners. One of them mentioned he used to live in Chicago and knew the suburbs well. He started asking Amanda questions about neighborhoods, private schools, specific places. Amanda got visibly flustered and just made up answers that didn't make any sense. The partner knew she was lying, but he didn't call her out on it then. He said the incident had caused a lot of tension in their new marriage because Leo was afraid her lies would eventually destroy her career. "I didn't marry her for her family background," he said. "I married her for the person she was when I met her in Chicago. Now, she seems like someone else, just desperate to impress people who probably aren't even worth it." He told me Amanda had admitted to him that she felt stuck between two different worlds, her humble childhood and her sky-high professional ambitions. She says her firm is full of people from old money, who come from families with long traditions. When they talk about their parents, they're talking about Ivy League degrees and investments. She feels inferior. That word, inferior, echoed in the quiet cafe. My daughter felt inferior because she was my daughter. I explained to Leo that I didn't hate Amanda, but I also couldn't just pretend her words at the wedding hadn't wounded me. A last name isn't just a tag you wear, I told him. It's a responsibility. It represents everyone who came before you, and it's a promise to everyone who will come after. If she thinks it's such a burden, then maybe it's time she learned to get by without it. Leo looked at me, alarmed. What do you mean by that? I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I told him about a client who had hired me to restore a beautiful 18th century desk. It was in terrible shape, I said. Water damaged, paint splattered, seemingly worthless. I spent 3 solid months bringing it back to its original dignity. When I delivered it, it was glowing. 2 weeks later, the client sold it at an auction because he decided it didn't match his new, modern furniture. Leo understood the metaphor immediately. So what did you do? He asked. I learned, I said, to be much more selective about who I give my best work to. After he left, I went back to my workshop, opened my green ledger, and wrote a brief summary of our conversation. His visit confirmed it. Amanda hadn't just acted on a whim at the wedding. She had been carefully planning this symbolic break from her origins for a long time. I could understand her dilemma, but I couldn't forgive the method. There are honorable ways to build a new life without taking a sledgehammer to the foundations that held you up. That night, before I went to sleep, I took an envelope out of my desk drawer. It had arrived 2 days earlier, postmarked from Boston, from a law firm. I hadn't opened it yet, because some instinct told me that whatever was inside was about to change the direction of this family story that was just starting to unfold. On Thursday, I finally decided to open the envelope from Boston. The letterhead read Jimenez and Associates, and it was signed by a Thomas Jimenez. The words inside made me sit down, motionless, for several minutes. According to the document, I was the sole surviving legitimate heir of a Mr. Arthur Shaw, who had passed away on May 3, 2024, in Boston, with no direct descendants. The estate, it said, included real estate holdings, various financial investments, and business shares valued at approximately $10 million. The inheritance was contingent only on my ability to prove my identity and my relationship to the deceased, paperwork the firm was prepared to handle if I chose to claim it. I had to read the letter 3 times. Arthur Shaw. He was my paternal grandfather's older brother, who had moved to Massachusetts back in the 1950s to find work in construction. He had started a real estate company that apparently did very well during the Cape Cod tourism boom, and he had died a bachelor with no children. It had taken the lawyers months to trace the family line and find any legitimate heirs with the Shaw name. I was the only person who fit the legal requirements of his will. The irony was so sharp it was almost comical. At the exact same time my daughter was publicly rejecting our last name as a worthless burden, fate decided to show me that this very name was attached to a family fortune she never knew existed. I placed the letter in my desk drawer with my other important documents and went back to my workbench. I needed to finish Mr. Parrish's cabinets before the weekend, and focusing on a tangible task always helps me process complicated news. While I was measuring the doors, I thought about what this inheritance meant. It wasn't just the money that astonished me, but the sudden proof that my last name had roots deeper and stronger than I'd ever known. Arthur had built an entire business, created jobs, and contributed to his community. His legacy was proof that the Shaws could be just as successful, just as important, as any other family. That night, I called the law firm in Boston and made a phone appointment with Thomas Jimenez for the following Friday. I wanted to understand every legal detail before I made a single move. I wasn't going to be hasty, just as I hadn't been hasty in reacting at the wedding. Big decisions need time to settle. What was already clear, though, was that this news changed the entire dynamic of my relationship with Amanda. She had thrown away a last name because she thought it was holding her back. Reality was about to show her that she had just despised the one thing that could have given her everything. On Friday, before my scheduled call, I drove to the cemetery to visit David's grave. I told him all about it, quietly, standing there by the headstone. About the letter from Boston, about my conversation with Leo, about Amanda's plan to erase our name from her life. What would you do, David? I asked the gray granite where his ashes were interred. I wasn't expecting an answer from the beyond, just the kind of clarity that sometimes comes when you speak your troubles out loud. David had always protected Amanda, even when her choices were questionable, but he was also incredibly firm when it came to family values. I could almost hear him saying, "Children are meant to grow up and leave, Margaret, but they are never meant to forget who raised them." The phone call with Thomas Jimenez lasted nearly an hour. He explained that Arthur had been a very precise man who had written his will with extremely specific instructions for finding his heirs and managing his estate. One clause in particular stood out. The will stipulated that only individuals who honored the Shaw name with dignity and pride could receive the inheritance. It was as if my great-uncle Arthur had somehow foreseen a situation exactly like the one I was now in with Amanda. I agreed to start the process of claiming the inheritance, but I insisted on absolute discretion until I decided what to do next. Thomas assured me of complete confidentiality, understanding as a professional that family inheritances often bring tensions that need to be handled delicately. After I hung up, I sat on my workshop stool and just looked at my hands, stained with wood finish and marked by decades of hard, physical work. These were the hands that had restored priceless furniture, fixed my neighbors' homes, and supported my family through every hard time. Amanda had watched these hands work her entire childhood. But now, she was ashamed of what they represented. Arthur's inheritance gave me the power to prove that the Shaw name wasn't a synonym for limitation, but for the ability to create wealth and progress. But it also handed me a difficult moral choice. Was I obligated to share this news with a daughter who had, in front of 200 people, renounced her part in our family's history? I opened my green ledger and wrote a single line that summarized my thoughts. The name she rejected just became the most valuable one she has ever known. I put my pen down and went for a long walk through my neighborhood. The streets of the old district were quiet in the twilight. Neighbors were watering flowers on their porches, and children were playing in the little square by the church. This was my world, simple and real, the same one Amanda now found so inadequate for her ambitions. As I walked, I realized the inheritance wasn't just about the money. It was a chance to teach the most important lesson of my life as a mother, that the value of a last name isn't measured by the bank account attached to it, but by the integrity of the people who carry it. The weekend passed in that same heavy quiet. No calls from New York. No messages of apology. No attempts at making things right. Amanda seemed to have decided that silence was the best way to let the wedding incident just fade away. But I had learned something fundamental in my 68 years. Time doesn't heal all wounds. It just turns them into scars. And if Amanda wasn't willing to learn that lesson, she would have to live her life without ever knowing what she'd lost by despising the name that had just become the key to a fortune, one that would have fulfilled every one of her material dreams. My decision was made. I would wait. I would watch. And when the moment was right, I would show her the true value of what she had so carelessly thrown away. My curiosity about Arthur Shaw soon turned into a systematic investigation that took up my afternoons in August. Thomas Jimenez had provided me with contacts for people who had worked with my great-uncle for decades, and every new conversation showed me another side of a man who had turned his ambition into a lasting legacy. The first person I met with was James Cole, a retired architect who had designed 3 of Arthur's residential buildings in Hyannisport. We met in a cafe in Boston's Beacon Hill, surrounded by the hum of summer tourists. Arthur was demanding, but always fair, James recalled, stirring his coffee. He would never accept cheap materials, even if it cost him more. He always said that a poorly constructed building is a betrayal of the family that's going to live inside it. He showed me old photographs from the construction sites in the 70s and 80s. In several of them, there was Arthur, personally overseeing the work, dressed in practical blue overalls and a white hard hat. One story in particular stuck with me. During the construction of his most complex building, they discovered structural issues that would require expensive changes to the foundation. Other developers would have just papered over the problem, James said. Arthur stopped the entire project for 6 weeks, brought in new engineers, and spent an extra $150,000 to guarantee it was perfectly safe. "My name is going to be on this building for the next 100 years, he told us. I will not be responsible for it failing any family." That sentence echoed in my mind, sounding so much like my own beliefs about my work. The next testimony I heard was from Rose Carter, an accountant who had managed Arthur's finances from 1985 until his death. She met me in her sleek office in the financial district, surrounded by file cabinets that held decades of business history. Arthur never spent money on himself, she explained, pulling out old ledgers. He lived in a simple apartment, drove a practical car, and ate at diners. He reinvested every penny back into new projects or he saved it. She showed me bank statements that proved his simple lifestyle. Even in years when his income was in the millions, his personal expenses were almost nothing. Rose also told me that Arthur had set up a special fund intended for only one purpose: locating distant relatives. Every year, he put $5,000 into it for genealogical research. He hired investigators, checked church records, and even paid for ads in Midwestern newspapers, all looking for information about the Shaw family from his hometown. For decades, the search led nowhere, mostly because my grandfather had moved so many times after Arthur left for the East Coast. He was obsessed with finding worthy heirs, Rose said. He used to say that money without family was like a river without a riverbed. My third meeting was with Stephen Moore, a construction foreman who had worked under Arthur for 20 years. He met me in a traditional tavern in the North End, in an authentic, working-class place that was a world away from the fancy offices I'd been in. Mr. Arthur never lost touch with his roots, Stephen assured me. He was up before dawn, always the first man on site and the last one to leave. He'd even come by on Sundays, just to make sure the site was secure. But the thing that impressed us all, Stephen said, was his memory for the details of his workers' families. He knew our wives' names, he'd ask about our kids, he remembered birthdays. When my youngest son was getting into trouble in high school, Mr. Arthur helped me find a better school for him and fronted me the money for tuition, no questions asked. He told me about other, similar acts of kindness: interest-free loans for employees who were getting married, help with medical bills during family emergencies, and extra bonuses when a new grandchild was born. The picture that emerged from all these stories was of a man who had held on to his core values, even after becoming incredibly successful. Arthur had been the complete opposite of my Amanda. He was proud of where he came from, loyal to his principles, and deeply connected to his community. The contrast was painful, but it also made me very clear on what kind of legacy I now had to protect. During the train ride back to Chicago, I thought about the new responsibility that had landed on my shoulders. I wasn't just managing a pile of money, I was now the keeper of a family legacy that had taken generations to build. Arthur had worked for 40 years to build that wealth, all in the hope of passing it to descendants who would respect his hard work. I got the final piece of testimony by pure chance. Back at Boston's South Station, while I was waiting for the express train to Chicago, I noticed an elderly man reading a newspaper on a bench nearby. It was Frank Shaw, Arthur's second cousin. As I learned after I introduced myself, he had heard about my great-uncle's death in the local paper. He was the sharpest one in the family, Frank told me. He always knew he had to get out of our little town to make something of himself. But he never, ever forgot where he came from. He wrote me long letters, telling me about his projects. He sent money when the harvests were bad, asked about all the relatives. Frank explained that Arthur's branch of the family had dispersed after the Great Depression, when economic hardship forced many young people to immigrate. We lost touch because there were no phones or good roads. But Arthur always promised he would return when he was rich to help rebuild what we had lost. Back in Chicago, I organized all the collected information into a specific folder titled Family History, Arthur Shaw. I included photographs, transcribed testimonies, business documents, and approximate genealogies. It was a valuable archive that demonstrated the upward trajectory of the Shaws, from Midwestern farmers to prosperous businessmen, always maintaining values of work, honesty, and personal integrity. This documentation became the basis for my next strategic decision. I didn't plan to immediately reveal the inheritance to Amanda, but I did want to show her that her prejudices about our family origin lacked historical foundation. That I prepared a selection of photographs of Arthur on his construction sites, press articles mentioning his successful projects, and testimonies highlighting his business reputation. The temptation to confront her directly was intense, but I resisted it for tactical reasons. First, I wanted to verify if she maintained her dismissive attitude toward our name, or if she showed signs of reflection. The most effective restoration decisions require precise timing, like following the natural grain of the wood to avoid splintering. The plan involved several sequential phases. First, silent observation of Amanda's evolution. Second, evaluation of her attitude toward me and our family name. Third, a decision on whether she deserved to know about the inheritance or if she should remain permanently excluded from it. It was a process that required patience. But the deepest lessons of motherhood admit no improvisation or emotional haste. Observing Amanda from a distance became an exercise in patience that tested my self-control. During September, through her social media posts, I could follow the evolution of her new married life in New York. The photographs showed dinners at elegant restaurants, visits to art galleries, weekend getaways to European cities. In all the images, she was tagged as Amanda Scott, solidifying her systematic abandonment of her mother's last name. Her friends commented on the post with phrases like, "You've become so sophisticated," or, "You don't even seem like the same girl from Chicago." Observations she received as compliments. The transformation was evident. She had managed to reinvent herself as the polished professional she had always aspired to be. What struck me most was the total absence of references to her family of origin. Not a single mention of David on the anniversary of his passing, not a nostalgic memory of Chicago, not even childhood photographs that could humanize her new public image. It was as if she had decided her life began when she got the job in New York and married Leo. One afternoon in late September, while repairing an antique display case for a client from the Old District, I received an unexpected visit from Paula Scott, David's older sister. We hadn't seen each other in months since the funeral, and her presence in the workshop surprised me pleasantly. She arrived carrying a bag of pastries from a downtown bakery. "Margaret, I came to see how you are. The neighbors say you've been very quiet lately." She settled into the wicker chair that David used to occupy when he came down to the workshop on winter afternoons. Paula had heard rumors about Amanda's behavior at the wedding, although no one had told her the full details. A cousin of Leo's mentioned there were tensions during the toast. "Is it true Amanda said something inappropriate about the family?" I wasn't surprised the news had circulated. Chicago is a city where family news travels faster than the L train. I explained what happened without dramatizing, with the same neutrality I would use to describe a technical flaw in a piece of furniture. Paula listened in silence, gradually furrowing her brow as she understood the magnitude of the offense. "David would have been terribly upset," she whispered at the end. "He always defended Amanda, even when she showed those airs of grandeur she picked up in New York. But this..." She shook her head in disapproval. "There are lines you don't cross, no matter how ambitious you are." During our conversation, relevant information emerged that I hadn't known. Paula kept in sporadic contact with an old coworker of David's, Kathleen, who now lived in New York near the neighborhood where Amanda and Leo resided. Kathleen has seen them a couple of times at the supermarket. She says Amanda seems like a different person. Expensive clothes, studied manners, a more neutral accent. "And what do you plan to do?" Paula asked me directly. "You can't just sit back after such a lack of respect." It was the question I asked myself every night before falling asleep. I answered her honestly. "I'm waiting for the right moment to teach her a lesson she won't forget, but it has to be something definitive, not a temporary scolding she can ignore." During October, income from Arthur's inheritance began to accumulate in my bank accounts regularly. Each month I received transfers for rents from the Massachusetts properties, dividends from financial investments, and profits from business shares. These were amounts that exceeded my annual income as an antique restorer. But they arrived with the naturalness of someone receiving the fruits of well-managed investments. This new economic reality posed practical dilemmas for me about how to manage the wealth without altering my essential lifestyle. I decided to maintain my usual routine in the workshop, continue accepting restoration orders, and keep living in the same modest apartment in the old neighborhood. The fortune was a pedagogical instrument, not a reason to change my personal identity. However, I began to discreetly explore options to use part of the resources for projects that would honor David's memory and Arthur's legacy. I contacted local charities specializing in helping families with financial difficulties, particularly those headed by artisans, carpenters, masons, or other manual laborers. In early November, I received an unexpected call that temporarily altered my plans for silent observation. It was Leo, his voice tense and urgent. "Margaret, I need to talk to you. It's important." We met that same afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. He arrived looking worried, dressed more simply than during his visit to the workshop months ago. What he told me confirmed my worst suspicions about the evolution of my daughter's character. Amanda had intensified her obsession with erasing traces of her family origin, going to the extreme of inventing false stories about her past when interacting with colleagues or important clients. She tells them her mother was a retired art curator, that she grew up in a residential Chicago neighborhood, that she studied in private schools, Leo revealed, clearly uncomfortable. I've asked her several times to stop those lies, but she says they are narrative adjustments necessary for professional networking. But there's something more serious, Leo continued, lowering his voice. Last week, we went to a dinner with her company's executives. One of them mentioned he had lived in Chicago during the 80s and knew the city well. He started asking Amanda details about neighborhoods, schools, specific places. Amanda got very nervous and made up answers that didn't fit. The conversation lasted for over an hour. Leo confessed he felt trapped between loyalty to his wife and the discomfort his social climbing strategies caused him. "I didn't marry her for her family origin, but for who she was when I met her in Chicago. Now she seems like another person, all obsessed with impressing people who may not be worth the effort." As we parted, Leo asked me not to reveal the content of our conversation to Amanda. "I just wanted you to know that there's someone in New York who doesn't approve of what she's doing. David didn't deserve for his daughter to go to these extremes." His words moved me deeply because they confirmed that family values still had defenders. Back home, I updated my notes in the green ledger with the information Leo provided. Amanda's behavior had evolved from simple family shame to the systematic falsification of her personal history. She wasn't just disowning her last name. She had begun to deny my existence as part of her social reinvention strategy. Arthur's inheritance now took on an almost poetic dimension. My daughter was lying about her origin to impress superiors who valued family status, while ignoring that she had legitimate access to a fortune that would have satisfied all her material ambitions. The irony was perfect. By despising the Shaw name, she had automatically lost the right to benefit from the wealth that same name had generated. That night, before bed, I took out the yellowish photograph that Frank had shown me, a young Arthur posing with his brothers next to the family home. I studied it carefully, looking for family resemblances, imagining the conversations they might have had about the future. None of those serious-faced men could have imagined that decades later, a direct descendant would be ashamed of the name they had carried with a farmer's pride. I only had to decide when and how to reveal this truth to her so she would understand the magnitude of her mistake, preferably when it was too late to correct it. December arrived with the determination to formalize the decisions I had been maturing over months of silent reflection. Arthur's inheritance was no longer an abstract novelty, but a consolidated reality that generated constant income, providing me with the resources to materialize the most important educational project of my motherhood. I contacted Patricia Morgan again, the lawyer who had advised on the initial process, to explore creating a charitable foundation that would channel a significant part of the estate towards specific social causes. The meeting was held in her office on a cold morning early in the month. "I want to establish an institution that helps families of manual laborers and artisans," I explained as we reviewed the updated financial documents. "Scholarships for the children of carpenters, restorers, plumbers, electricians, interest-free loans for small family workshops, medical aid for craftsmen without full insurance." Patricia took meticulous notes, evaluating the legal and fiscal viability of each proposal. "It's a beautiful initiative, Mrs. Shaw. Have you thought about the foundation's name?" I didn't hesitate. The David Scott Shaw Foundation, in memory of my husband. It was the ultimate tribute to the one who had held our family together with unconditional love. The incorporation process required several weeks of complex paperwork. We had to draft detailed bylaws, define specific objectives, establish selection criteria for beneficiaries, and design monitoring protocols for the aid given. Patricia coordinated with notaries, tax managers, and official agencies to ensure the foundation complied with all applicable legal regulations. My role was to approve strategic decisions and provide the initial endowment, $3 million, which would generate enough interest to finance charitable activities for decades without depleting the principal capital. While the foundation's creation progressed, I maintained absolute discretion about the project. I kept working in the workshop with the same dedication as always, accepting modest orders, maintaining regular hours. The only difference was that I had begun to turn down jobs that required me to travel out of Chicago for several days, as I needed to be available for foundation-related meetings. In January 2025, the David Scott Shaw Foundation received official authorization to begin activities. The public presentation ceremony was held in a hall at Chicago's City Hall, attended by representatives from construction unions, artisan associations, and local charities. I gave a brief speech highlighting the foundation's commitment to dignifying manual labor and supporting families who, like mine, for decades, had built the city with honest effort. The local media covered the event with positive articles, highlighting the generosity of the anonymous donor who had made the initiative possible. The media impact was greater than expected. The Chicago Chronicle published an extensive report on the foundation, including photographs from the presentation where I appeared symbolically handing the first scholarship to the daughter of a retired plumber. The local news aired a 5-minute interview on the regional broadcast. Someone who greatly values the work of artisans decided to dedicate part of their estate to helping families like ours, I declared to the cameras. The irony of those words gave me private satisfaction. I was describing Arthur without lying while omitting crucial information. The first beneficiaries were selected according to strict criteria I had established during the preparatory meetings. 5 university scholarships for children of manual laborers with outstanding academic records. 3 interest-free loans for workshops needing to upgrade obsolete machinery. 2 medical grants for craftsmen with costly illnesses. The media echo of the foundation reached New York via social media and digital newspapers. One afternoon in February, I received a phone call I had been anticipating for weeks. It was Amanda, her voice confused and slightly agitated. "Mom, I've seen news about a foundation in Chicago that helps people like us. Do you know about it?" Her way of phrasing the question revealed the discomfort any topic related to our social status caused her. I replied with studied naturalness. "Yes, it's an interesting initiative. It seems there are generous people who value the work of artisans. Do you know who funds it?" Amanda insisted. "The papers say it's an anonymous donor, but it must be someone very wealthy. $3 million isn't an amount just anyone can donate." The figure had caught her attention, as was logical for someone obsessed with money and social status. "I have no idea," I lied deliberately. "I suppose there are rich people who remember where they come from and want to help families going through similar difficulties." The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Amanda was processing the implications of my words, probably connecting them to her own behavior. Over the next few days, Amanda sent me several WhatsApp messages asking for details about the foundation. She wanted to know the donor's name, the specific criteria for awarding aid, the institution's future growth prospects. Her questions revealed genuine curiosity mixed with something that could be interpreted as moral unease. The moment of greatest tension came when she asked me to intercede to get her a meeting with the foundation's leadership. "Leo and I are thinking of making a significant donation, but we'd like to speak directly with the decision-maker." The request put me in a delicate position, as I would have to refuse without being able to explain the real reasons. "I don't think I have that kind of influence," I replied. "The foundation maintains strict confidentiality about its internal procedures, but you can write directly to the official address listed in the newspapers." His insistence confirmed that the charitable project had piqued her interest in an unexpected way. By the end of February, the foundation had settled into its normal operational rhythm. The offices operated from a rented downtown space near the cathedral, with competent administrative staff managing applications, evaluating cases, and coordinating aid deliveries. I visited the facility weekly to oversee activities and meet beneficiaries personally, seeing the young children of Masons enrolling in university courses, watching family workshops modernize with new machinery, hearing testimonies of gratitude from artisans who had overcome medical crises thanks to our support. All of it validated the decision to channel the inheritance toward constructive causes. During a routine visit to the foundation, the coordinator informed me of an unusual application that had arrived by mail. Amanda Shaw Scott, residing in New York, was offering to volunteer for the institution's promotional activities and expressed interest in collaborating financially with its charitable projects. The letter included her professional resume, work references, and a personal statement explaining her emotional connection to the families of manual laborers. Reading the document, I smiled bitterly. My daughter had temporarily retrieved the Shaw name to present herself to a foundation she admired, but she continued to use the Scott name in her daily professional life. That night, I wrote an entry in the Green Ledger that summarized my feelings. Amanda wants to be part of an institution funded with money from the name she rejected. The irony is perfect, but she doesn't know it yet. It's time to complete her education. The call came one day in March, exactly at 11 in the morning, as I was finishing varnishing a dining table for clients from the suburbs. It was Amanda, but her voice sounded different, less confident, with a note of vulnerability I hadn't heard since her adolescence. "Mom, I need to ask you for something important," she began, after the usual formal greetings. "Leo and I are going through some temporary financial difficulties. I was wondering if you could help us with a small loan, something like $5,000. I'd pay you back in 6 months with interest." The moment I had been anticipating for months had arrived sooner than expected. I put the brush in the can and sat on the high stool I use for precision work. "What kind of difficulties?" I asked, in the neutral tone I had perfected during this long family crisis. Amanda took a moment to answer, as if carefully choosing her words. "The company is restructuring some departments. My position is secure, but they've cut the quarterly bonuses we were expecting. And Leo wants to change jobs, find something more stable, but that means a period with no income from him." I listened to her full explanation without interrupting. She spoke of unexpected apartment expenses, bank loan payments that had become heavier, the need to maintain a certain standard of living for her professional commitments in New York. She didn't directly mention the expensive dinners or weekend trips, but it was clear that the sophisticated lifestyle she had adopted had financial costs her real income couldn't comfortably sustain. "I understand the situation," I replied when she finished. "But I have a question. Why are you coming to me? As I understand it, you prefer to keep your distance from your family origins. I wouldn't want asking your mother, the antique restorer, for help to compromise your professional image." The silence that followed was so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was deeper. "Mom, I know I said some inappropriate things at the wedding. I was nervous. I'd had too much to drink. It wasn't my intention to offend you." The apology was partial and insufficient, but it revealed she had been thinking about the incident. However, she mentioned nothing about the subsequent lies Leo had told me about, nor the systematic name change on her professional and personal profiles. "Amanda," I said, with the firmness I had learned over decades of raising a daughter. "Words have consequences. They can't be erased with apologies of convenience when a financial need arises. But you're my mother," she insisted, with a note of desperation that felt familiar. It was the same tone she used as a child when she wanted David to intercede to soften my disciplinary decisions. Families help each other, regardless of any temporary differences that may arise. His choice of words caught my attention. She had turned the public humiliation of our name into temporary differences, a euphemism that minimized the gravity of her behavior. It was clear she still didn't fully grasp the dimension of the offense. I explained that my refusal was not motivated by personal resentment, but by educational principles. A woman who is ashamed of her last name must be able to build her future without depending on the person who bears that name. If you consider the Shaw name a social burden, the logical thing is to also reject financial support from a Shaw. My argument was relentless but fair. I couldn't let her selectively use our family relationship, despising it in public when it suited her social ambitions, but turning to it in private when she needed money. "It's not that simple," Amanda protested. "I work in a very competitive environment where family image influences professional opportunities. It's a practical matter, not a personal one." Her response confirmed she still didn't recognize the fundamental error of her perspective. "That's precisely why my answer is no," I told her. "If your professional success requires denying my existence, you can't expect my help when that success falters." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Amanda alternating between pleas, promises of a change in attitude, and attempts to negotiate loan terms. She proposed higher interest, shorter repayment terms, additional guarantees. But I held my position with the firmness I had developed over months of preparing for this moment. Finally, when she realized my refusal was definitive, her tone shifted to something closer to indignation. "I don't understand your attitude, Mom. After everything I did for you when Dad was sick, when I had to come from New York to help with the doctors and the hospital paperwork." The reference to David hurt, but it also strengthened my resolve. Amanda had fulfilled basic daughter's duties during her father's illness, but that didn't grant her a perpetual license to humiliate his memory by despising the name I had shared with him for 30 years. "Your father would have helped you without hesitation," I acknowledged. "But your father also wouldn't have tolerated you denying our name in public to impress strangers." David Scott was proud to be part of the Shaw family, and he was proud of that name until the day he died. Amanda tried one last resort. "If you won't do it for me, do it for Leo. He's not to blame for any of this, and he's going through a tough time with the job change." It was a smart move. She knew my soft spot for her husband. "It's precisely because I value Leo," I replied, "that I think it's important for him to learn what kind of woman he chose as a wife. Lessons in character cannot be postponed indefinitely." When we hung up, after a tense and formal goodbye, I stood motionless in the workshop for several minutes. The conversation had been emotionally exhausting, but also liberating. I had maintained the necessary firmness without resorting to disproportionate reproaches or hurtful personal attacks. That afternoon, I worked with renewed intensity in the workshop, channeling the emotional tension into tasks requiring technical concentration. Manual labor had always served as therapy for me to process complex emotional situations. Every movement of the sandpaper, every pass of the plane, every turn of the screwdriver gradually calmed me until I regained my inner balance. During my usual solitary dinner, I reflected on the next stages of this family crisis, which had evolved exactly as I had anticipated. Amanda had exhausted the first option of superficial reconciliation based on partial apologies and immediate financial needs. Her next move would likely be more desperate. Arthur's inheritance continued to generate regular income, accumulating in bank accounts, while I maintained my usual modest life. Each monthly transfer reminded me of the central irony of this situation. My daughter was asking to borrow $5,000 from someone who possessed over $10 million, precisely because she had despised the name that would have given her access to that fortune. Her sentimental education was about to be completed with revelations that would forever transform her understanding of the real value of family names. The change began a week after the failed phone call. For the first time in months, Amanda started posting different content on her social media. A photograph of the old neighborhood appeared, taken from somewhere high up, captioned, "Chicago will always be my true home, even if life has taken me far away." It was a calculated message to demonstrate reconnection with her origins, but it maintained enough ambiguity not to compromise her professional image in New York. A few days later, he posted an old picture of David in our kitchen with the caption, "Missing my dad's Sunday lentils. Some flavors just can't be replaced." Amanda's strategy also included indirect attempts at rapprochement through third parties. Larry mentioned he had received a call from New York asking about my health and general financial situation. "Your daughter seemed worried. Said she noticed you've been quieter than usual lately." Paula Scott also informed me of a similar contact. Amanda had called asking if I needed help with medical appointments or bureaucratic paperwork related to my widow status. She was clearly exploring alternative ways to gauge my willingness for an eventual reconciliation, but without committing to direct approaches. The most sophisticated move came through Leo, who sent me a WhatsApp message requesting a private phone conversation. "Margaret, I'd like to talk to you about Amanda. But without her knowing, I think there are important things you should know." I agreed immediately, as I had always valued his honesty. "She's very upset by your refusal," Leo began without beating around the bush. "Not just because of the money, but because of what it represents. I think for the first time, she's starting to truly understand the consequences of what she said at the wedding." He told me Amanda had spent sleepless nights, looking through old family photographs she kept on her phone. Leo also revealed that the financial situation was more complex than Amanda had admitted during our conversation. We've accumulated excessive expenses trying to maintain a standard of living we really can't afford. Expensive dinners to impress clients, designer clothes for professional events. Weekend trips to keep up the image of success. But there's something more important, Leo continued. She started talking about the possibility of moving back to Chicago. She says New York is proving more stressful than she expected. That she misses the calmness of the Midwest. That maybe she made a mistake by moving so far from family. Honestly, it would make me happy, Leo admitted when I asked his opinion. I've never felt completely comfortable in New York. People are more superficial. Social relationships are more calculated. Everything revolves around work and money. In Chicago, we had genuine friends, a more relaxed social life, a better balance. During the conversation, a particularly relevant detail emerged. Leo told me Amanda had begun to discreetly research the David Scott Shaw Foundation, trying to identify the anonymous donor who had funded it. She's obsessed with that story. She says it must be someone who knew your husband. Maybe an old client of yours who became wealthy. Have you considered telling her the truth about your financial situation? Leo asked me directly. The question caught me off guard, as I wasn't sure how much he had inferred about my real circumstances. Margaret, I know there have been significant changes in your life over the past few months. The neighbors are talking. I explained that I had received a small inheritance from a distant relative, enough to improve my situation, but not to solve other people's financial problems. It was a partial truth, satisfying his curiosity without revealing information that could prematurely reach Amanda's ears. That's precisely why I'm being discreet about it, I explained. If Amanda knew I had financial resources, her approach to me would be motivated by material interest, not by genuine recognition of her mistakes. I prefer any reconciliation to come from genuine reflection. At the end of the conversation, Leo asked me to reconsider my attitude toward Amanda, arguing she was showing genuine signs of remorse and reflection. I'm not asking you to give her money, but maybe you could offer her some sign that the relationship can be repaired if she demonstrates real changes in her behavior. Tell her I am willing to rebuild our relationship when she proves she truly values the Shaw name, not just when she needs help from a Shaw, I replied. That night, after the conversation with Leo, I made a decision I had been postponing for weeks. It was time to accelerate the educational process, to create a situation that would force Amanda to directly confront the contradictions of her behavior. I contacted Patricia Morgan to discuss organizing a public event for the foundation that would generate significant media coverage. I want it to be something memorable, I explained. An event that demonstrates the institution's social impact and attracts regional and national media attention. Patricia suggested organizing a benefit gala at the Civic Opera House, attended by political figures, local business leaders, and representatives of social organizations. We could invite the mayor to present an official recognition to the foundation, get coverage from the local networks and major Midwestern newspapers. The date for the gala was set for the last Saturday of April. Invitations were sent to a select list of 100 personalities. The media confirmed full coverage, and the program included the presentation of a special recognition to the anonymous benefactor who has transformed the lives of dozens of Chicago families. I would attend as a special guest, officially maintaining my anonymity, but prepared to reveal my identity at the ceremony's climax. It was the perfect setting to show Amanda that the Shaw name had generated social recognition, community impact, and public respect. The Thursday before the gala, Amanda called me, her voice especially humble. Mom, I know we've had our differences, but I'd like to come to Chicago this weekend. I want to talk to you face to face. Apologize properly. Try to repair what's broken between us. The request came with perfect timing for my plans. That sounds good, I replied. But I want you to understand that serious conversations require complete honesty. No more half-truths or convenient excuses. She accepted the conditions without hesitation. Saturday would be a memorable day for both of us, though for different reasons than she imagined. The final lesson of this family crisis was about to begin, and I had all the necessary elements to make it definitive and unforgettable. Arthur's inheritance had provided me with the perfect teaching tools. Now I just had to use them at the right time and place so that Amanda would understand, perhaps too late, the true value of the name she had chosen to despise. Amanda arrived on Friday afternoon driving a rental car from O'Hare Airport. I saw her approaching from the workshop window. She walked more slowly than usual, her shoulders slightly slumped, carrying a small suitcase. Her appearance had subtly changed since the wedding. She was still dressed elegantly, but she had lost that arrogant confidence that characterized her movements in previous months. I opened the door without unnecessary drama, with the serenity I had cultivated during these months of emotional preparation. "Hi, Mom," she said. And in those two words, I sensed a vulnerability I hadn't detected since her adolescence. I invited her in, offered her coffee, asked about her trip, and about Leo. With the formal courtesy one extends to important but distant visitors. "Mom, I want to apologize," she began when we sat in the small living room where David used to watch his afternoon ball games. "Not just for what I said at the wedding, but for everything that's happened since. I behaved like a coward and an ungrateful daughter." Her speech sounded rehearsed, but the tears that began to well up in her eyes seemed genuine. I listened to her full confession without interruption. She told me about the social pressure she felt in New York, the insecurity that colleagues from wealthy families caused her, the irrational shame she had developed for our modest origins. "It's not that I was really ashamed of you or Dad," she explained. "I was ashamed of myself for not being born into a family that would make my professional path easier." "And what about the lies afterward?" I asked her directly. "Leo told me you've been inventing stories about your family origin to impress your superiors." Her face fell slightly. "He told you?" "I was hoping to explain it to you myself." I confirmed I knew the details of her personal reinvention in New York, including the systematic name change on social media and professional documents. "That behavior hurts me more than the wedding toast," I explained. "A public offense can be a momentary mistake. Systematically lying about your family identity is a sustained betrayal." Amanda sank into the sofa as if the weight of her decisions had physically materialized on her shoulders. "You're right. I've built a false version of myself to impress people who honestly probably wouldn't respect me more even if I were a banker's daughter. It's pathetic." For the first time during the conversation, her remorse sounded completely genuine, devoid of tactical calculations on how to regain my support. "The question is," I said, "what do you plan to do now with that false version you've built?" "I want to undo it," she replied without hesitation. "I want to get the Shaw name back on all my profiles, correct the lies I've told about our origins, prove publicly that I'm proud to be your daughter." Her words sounded convincing, but I had a more demanding test prepared to evaluate the depth of her transformation. "I'm glad to hear you say that, Amanda, because tomorrow you'll have the perfect opportunity to prove it." I explained that I had been invited to the gala for the David Scott Shaw Foundation at the Civic Opera House. "The foundation that helps workers' families?" she asked, surprised. "How did you get an invitation to such an exclusive event?" I explained that I had connections in the local artisan community, that some aid beneficiaries were old colleagues. "I'd like you to accompany me," I proposed. "It will be an opportunity for you to see how one can generate social respect without denying family origins." The proposal visibly excited her. "I'd love to go with you. It could be a way to show publicly that I'm not ashamed of being part of a worker's family. There's one condition," I added. "I want you to use your full name during the entire evening. Amanda Shaw Scott. No hiding, no half-truths." She immediately agreed to the condition. She even suggested we could use the occasion to introduce her to professional contacts in Chicago. During the dinner I prepared that night, lentils with sausage, David's recipe, the conversation flowed with a naturalness we hadn't experienced since before her move to New York. Amanda told me details about the pressures at work, the difficulties of social adjustment, the loneliness she had felt far from her familiar family environment. "Ambition blinded me," she admitted, savoring the lentils. "I thought professional success would compensate for any personal sacrifice. But I've discovered that success without authentic roots is hollow, unsatisfying." "Your father would have been proud to hear you talk like that," I said, and I saw her eyes moisten again. After dinner, we took out family photo albums we had stored after David's funeral. Amanda looked at the pictures with renewed attention, as if seeing them for the first time. One particular photograph caught her eye. It was from her college graduation. David and I flanking her holding the diploma with a proud expression. "Do you know what hurts me most about this picture?" she asked. "That you both are more proud of my achievement than I was." I was already thinking about the next step, about impressing future employers. "You were just happy to see me succeed." "That's unconditional love," I explained. "Parents celebrate their children's successes without expecting recognition. But when those children grow up and reject us to impress strangers, the pain is proportional to the love invested." Amanda nodded with a grave expression. "I understand now why my request for money upset you so much. It wasn't just the loan. It was the hypocrisy of rejecting you in public and turning to you in private when it suited me." Saturday dawned clear with that golden Midwestern spring light that makes Chicago look like a postcard. During breakfast, Amanda asked me details about the gala. What kind of people would be there? If I personally knew the foundation's anonymous donor? I answered with general information, carefully hiding the details that would turn the evening into a devastating revelation. "I just ask you to keep an open mind," I warned her. "Some things you'll discover tonight might surprise you." In the mid-afternoon, we began to get ready for the gala. Amanda dressed in an elegant dark suit. I chose my best dress, the same one I had worn for my wedding to David 30 years earlier. Before leaving for the Civic Opera House, I stopped by the workshop to pick up an envelope I had prepared in the preceding weeks. It contained documents related to Arthur's inheritance, photographs of the Massachusetts properties, financial statements, and a personal letter to Amanda explaining the reasons for my silence. The final moment of truth had arrived, and I was prepared for all its consequences. The gala would become the perfect stage to complete my daughter's sentimental education, demonstrating to her irreversibly the true value of the name she had chosen to despise. The Civic Opera House glittered under the nightlights when we arrived by taxi at 8 p.m. The neoclassical facade was lit with special spotlights for the occasion, and a red carpet stretched from the main entrance to the curb, where photographers from various media outlets captured the arrival of notable guests. Amanda observed the scene with a fascinated expression, clearly impressed by the scale of the event. "I didn't imagine a charity foundation could organize something so elegant," she commented as we got out of the car. "The anonymous donor must have invested a considerable fortune in this gala." A hostess asked for our invitations at the entrance. I presented the 2 passes I had specially requested, printed on high-quality paper with the foundation's emblem and gold relief. "Mrs. Shaw," the hostess read, checking her list, "you have a table reserved in the VIP section. Please follow the usher." Amanda looked at me with renewed surprise. "VIP table? Mom? I didn't know you had such influential contacts in these circles." I vaguely explained that the organizers had valued my contribution as a representative of the Chicago artisan community. The interior of the theater had been transformed for the occasion. The main floor seating had been reconfigured with elegantly decorated round tables, each seating 8 people. The side boxes held political figures and prominent business leaders, while the main stage featured a large screen projecting images of the foundation's beneficiaries. Our table was located in the front row with a direct view of the stage. Our tablemates included the director of a major Chicago construction firm, the president of the Downtown Business Association, a journalist specializing in social issues, and a philanthropic couple known for funding local cultural projects. Amanda introduced herself to everyone as Amanda Shaw Scott, financial consultant, using her full name, just as we had agreed. Her behavior was impeccable, polite, genuinely interested in the conversations, showing authentic respect for the foundation's goals. During the pre-dinner cocktail hour, Amanda took the opportunity to make professional contacts, potentially useful for her eventual return to Chicago. She exchanged business cards with several entrepreneurs, discussed financial collaboration opportunities, and demonstrated solid knowledge of the Midwestern markets. "I'm considering moving back to my hometown," she explained to those who asked about her current job situation. At 9 o'clock sharp, an elegant chime announced the start of the official ceremony. The mayor took the stage to give the opening speech, highlighting the importance of private initiatives that complement public social policies. The David Scott Shaw Foundation represents the best of Chicago's solidarity, he declared to enthusiastic applause. Patricia Morgan followed him as president of the foundation. She presented a detailed report on the activities carried out during the first year of operation. The figures were impressive: 53 university scholarships granted, 26 interest-free loans for family workshops, 34 medical grants provided, over 200 families directly benefited. All of this has been possible thanks to the vision and generosity of one person who prefers to remain anonymous, Patricia explained. But tonight, she has exceptionally agreed to reveal her identity to pay public tribute to the memory of David Scott Shaw. The climactic moment had arrived. Patricia invited me to the stage with a discreet gesture that only I perceived from my seat. I stood up slowly, feeling Amanda's confused gaze and the growing attention of the guests, who wondered who this older woman walking toward the main podium was. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia announced into the microphone, "I have the honor of introducing the benefactor of the David Scott Shaw Foundation, Mrs. Margaret Shaw." The silence that followed was absolute. From the stage, I could see Amanda's face, which had gone completely pale as she understood the implications of what she was witnessing. I took the microphone with hands that trembled slightly, but with a voice that came out firm and clear. "Good evening. A year ago, I lost the most important man in my life, David Scott Shaw, whose name this foundation bears. A few months later, I received an unexpected inheritance from my great-uncle, Arthur Shaw, a Massachusetts businessman who built a considerable fortune over 4 decades of honest work." I paused deliberately, allowing Amanda to process the information she was receiving. That inheritance amounted to $10.4 million. The murmur of surprise that rippled through the theater was audible even from the stage. I continued. "I decided to allocate a significant portion of those resources to helping families like mine, artisans and manual laborers who build this city with daily effort." My gaze went directly to Amanda, who remained motionless in her chair. Her expression was a combination of astonishment, painful understanding, and something that looked like deep shame. "The Shaw name," I continued, "has been a source of pride for my family for generations. My great-uncle Arthur immigrated to Massachusetts when he was very young. Worked as a mason, saved every dime, invested wisely, and built a respectable real estate empire. He was never ashamed of his humble origins. He transformed them into business strength. The final revelation came with surgical precision. Unfortunately, not all members of my family have properly valued what it means to carry this name. 10 months ago, during a family celebration, I heard my only daughter publicly declare that she had always hated being named Shaw, that she was ashamed of our origin." The silence in the theater was deafening. That night, I decided that whoever rejects a last name does not deserve to benefit from the fortune that name has generated. Amanda had buried her head in her hands, and her shoulders were shaking almost imperceptibly. "That is why I created this foundation," I continued, "to demonstrate that the Shaw name can generate social recognition, community impact, and public respect. To teach that the value of a name is not measured by the money that accompanies it, but by the integrity of those who carry it." I concluded with words aimed directly at my daughter. "A last name is a responsibility, not a burden. It represents those who came before and commits those who will come after. If someone considers it dead weight, they must be prepared to live without the benefits that weight has generated over decades of family work." The applause that followed was long and emotional, but I only watched Amanda, who finally lifted her gaze to the stage, tears streaming down her cheeks. I walked off the stage amidst congratulations from organizers and guests, but my attention was fully focused on returning to the table. Amanda had stood up and was waiting by her chair with an expression that mixed emotional devastation, delayed comprehension, and something that could be interpreted as painful admiration. When I reached her side, she said nothing. She just hugged me with desperate force and whispered in my ear, "Mom, forgive me. I've been a complete idiot." The gala continued with award presentations and beneficiary testimonials, but we remained in silence, processing the implications of the revelation that had just forever transformed our family relationship. Amanda had discovered that the name she despised had funded the institution she admired, that her antique restorer mother was a millionaire by inheritance. The lesson was complete, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. A year and a half after that gala that changed our lives, I am writing these lines from the terrace of my new apartment in downtown Chicago. The view spans the city rooftops, fading into the golden horizon of the Midwestern sunset. The David Scott Shaw Foundation has grown into a nationally recognized institution with branches in 3 states and more than 400 families benefited. Amanda returned to Chicago permanently 6 months after the revelation at the theater. The process was not immediate. It required complicated work negotiations, bureaucratic hurdles to transfer her job, and above all, a profound exercise in humility to rebuild relationships she had damaged. The New York firm agreed to transfer her to their Chicago office with a 30% pay cut, a condition she accepted without protest. "I'd rather earn less money being authentic than maintain a high salary playing a fake character," she told me during one of our reconciliation talks. Our authentic family reunion began gradually, building trust on more solid foundations than those that had existed during her youth. Amanda insisted on working weekends in the workshop, learning restoration techniques she had disdained during her adolescence. "I want to truly understand what manual labor means," she'd explain, patiently sanding an uneven surface. "For years, I thought it was inferior to my office job. Now I see it requires skill, patience, and precision that I don't possess." Watching her concentrate on the wood, repeating gestures I had mastered over decades filled me with a renewed maternal satisfaction. Leo adapted to the change with genuine enthusiasm. The return to Chicago gave him back the peace he had lost in New York, where he had felt constantly judged by superficial social standards he didn't share. "I can finally be myself without fearing it will harm Amanda's career," he confessed to me during a family dinner. He found a job at a local cultural foundation, work that brought him more personal satisfaction than his previous roles in marketing consulting. I made the most significant decision during the fall of 2025. After months of observing Amanda's authentic transformation, I decided to gradually incorporate her into the management of the family inheritance, not as an undeserved gift, but as recognition of her personal growth and demonstrated commitment to the values that had built Arthur's fortune. She began by volunteering at the foundation, getting to know individual cases, participating in application evaluations, understanding from the inside the social impact of the wealth she had once despised. Her financial expertise proved valuable in optimizing the investments that sustained the charitable activities. "Mom, I need to ask you something important," she said one afternoon as we reviewed the foundation's annual accounts together. "Will you ever be able to completely forgive me for what I did, or will there always be a scar between us?" Her question moved me with its vulnerable honesty. "Amanda," I replied, "forgiveness doesn't erase wounds, but it allows them to heal correctly. What matters isn't forgetting the past, but building a future where those mistakes have served a positive purpose." In the spring, when the foundation celebrated its 2nd anniversary, Amanda gave a public speech that filled me with maternal pride. 2 years ago, she declared to the media, "I believed success meant escaping my origins, denying the family history that had shaped me. I learned in the hardest way possible that true success means honoring where you come from while building toward where you are going." Leo and Amanda announced in the summer that they were expecting their first child. The news moved me deeply, not just at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, but because it represented family continuity, rebuilt on solid values. "We want our son to grow up knowing the complete history of the Shaw family," they told me. They decided to name him Arthur in honor of the great-uncle whose inheritance had transformed our lives. The restoration workshop continues to operate, though now more as a personal passion than a financial necessity. I still accept special commissions that motivate me technically, but I've turned down routine jobs that no longer stimulate me. Amanda has expressed interest in learning the trade seriously, not as a hobby, but as a complementary professional skill. "I want my son to know that his grandmother was capable of creating beauty with her hands in addition to managing millions of dollars," she explains. Arthur's inheritance continues to grow thanks to prudent investments and competent professional management. A substantial part continues to fund the foundation, but I have begun to diversify the social impact by creating a university scholarship fund specifically for the children of artisans, plumbers, electricians, and other manual trades. During the quiet afternoons, I go up to visit David's grave at St. Ferdinand's Cemetery. I tell him the family news. I describe Amanda's evolution. I explain how we are using Arthur's inheritance for purposes he would have completely approved of. Our daughter learned her lesson, I whisper to the granite where his ashes rest. It took longer than we'd like, but she finally understood what we tried to teach her. The Shaw name, carried with pride, inherited, not imposed. He will grow up hearing stories about his great-grandfather Arthur, who immigrated with empty pockets and built an empire, about his grandfather, David, who held the family together with unconditional love, about his grandmother, Margaret, who transformed an unexpected inheritance into social hope, and about his mother, Amanda, who made serious mistakes but had the courage to recognize and correct them. This story began with public humiliation and ended with private reconciliation. But its true value lies in the lessons in between. I learned that the deepest maternal love is not always the most permissive, that some lessons require time and distance to be effective, that patient education can generate more lasting transformations than immediate confrontations. Amanda learned that escaping family origins is impossible and counterproductive. That personal authenticity is more valuable than artificial social approval. That last names loaded with history are privileges to be honored, not burdens to be abandoned. When I hold the green ledger where I documented every stage of this crisis, I feel a deep satisfaction for having maintained the necessary firmness without losing essential compassion. The pages tell the story of a mother who chose to teach instead of punish, who used unexpected resources to create memorable lessons, who turned a material inheritance into a sentimental education. The Shaw name will continue for future generations, carried by descendants who will know its complete history, the glories and the shames, the triumphs and the errors, the inheritances received and the responsibilities assumed. David would be proud of this outcome, and Arthur would have approved of the use we have given his fortune. We Shaws have finally learned to honor our name.